How would you describe like the alcohol situation in DC?
In DC?
Yeah.
I think that because you have so many college campuses within the metro region, you have a lot of people that are just going out to sort of that think that is a huge part of the college experience. But then you have, in DC, you have a lot of neighborhoods like 8th Street or Adams Morgan or U Street that so much of the business model has now switched to being around alcohol establishments. And I just think at some point there's probably a bit of a tipping point that happens where it's not like a location where people are going to go and have a few beers and watch a football game. It's a tipping point where it's like the party. The entire strip becomes the party, and it's tough when you have a lot of families that live there, a lot of residences, older folks that live there. They sort of feel that they're being besieged every Friday and Saturday night with folks coming from all over the city to just come and party. So I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, it's a legal. It's a legal substance, but at the same time, I mean, I think that a lot of people there are some issues. That 2 police officers that had the most arrests in Metropolitan Police last year, both made DUI arrests. They overwhelmingly have the most arrests. So that just tells you right now that they didn't even have a DUI stop. They just sit and wait at the bridge or on 14th Street for people to come careening after they leave the clubs at 3 in the morning. And they made a lot of arrests just that way.
You talked about a 19-year-old GW student who died in Adams Morgan?
Yeah.
Do you think underage drinking in colleges is a lot of times ignored? Or how would you approach that?
I think part of that has to come, when it's on campus, I mean, it becomes the responsibility of the educational institution. I mean, it's not that long ago that we had the alcohol poisoning incident of the 20-year-old up in University of Maryland. It's definitely an issue. I mean, there's a difference between somebody feeling like it's a rite of passage, and then when it becomes problem drinking, where it's moments of sobriety that are intertwined with studying a little bit when most people are just there to party out like their entire sophomore years. I had that issue when I got away from my parents' house and moved out and was on my own at a university campus. It was like, you're free to do whatever you want, and the more that we go out and drink, the more my grades would suffer. It's tough to tell a 20-year-old kid that correlation, but when it's not on the university campus and you're going into establishments, I think that the city has a pretty big responsibility in making sure that ABC licensed establishments aren't serving to underage folks, particularly like at the college level, because they're gonna try. They're gonna try to find false identifications. They're gonna try to find ways to bars where they come in and get served, and if you're catering towards college kids, if you have it's like Georgetown party night or Howard University party night, you got to expect that you're going to get a large percentage of those folks that are going to come are going to be under the age of 21, and the city and those establishments need to be responsible about it and make sure that they're not serving minors, and if they do, and in the case of this place in Adams Morgan, where the GW student died of alcohol poisoning, the penalties should be pretty severe for that kind of thing, because not only was she 19, but she was drunk in such excess that somebody, a bartender, a front door guy, a waiter, should have noticed that this lady was in distress. I mean, she was not just drunk. I mean, that she was at a level that eventually killed her. And so for me, you have to have pretty severe penalties when people are huge scofflaws like that.
Do you think that's enforcement, stronger regulation? Do you think that's the best approach?
Probably. I mean, I guess that in DC it's a necessity. Is it the best approach to get people to curtail their drinking? Probably not. But when if it's legal, you have certain rules and regulations that people have to meet by, and when you're talking about death, it's sort of the end of it's not like you're saying we served a drink to an underage college student. You probably sold 10, 11, 12 drinks to an underage college student, and it cost her life. So in that sense, I think that stronger enforcement and holding people accountable for the type of business they run is a necessity. I mean, I think if anyone was to ask about should British Petroleum have to pay for cleanup facilities around what's happening in Louisiana, I think most people would say yes. Same thing's true with people who dispense alcohol in DC. If you're responsible and you're within the guidelines, you definitely you shouldn't be tainted with the same guys who are willing to serve underage people and serve them in excess. And so you have to come down hard on the people who violate the law, because you want people to run more responsible establishments.
What's your opinion on Abra, and why isn't it well known?
With the Abra, I think for a long time it's gotten better. I would say that it has gotten better, but for a long time there were a lot, and we do this throughout the city. We pass progressive laws, we pass strong laws, and then we have no way to enforce them. And so with Abra, for years and years and years, there was always a requirement that a restaurant had to meet essentially 45% food sales, and they never enforced it. And so you had places that would come in. I'd love to use the example of this place, Staccato, which was a music place on 18th Street, which has gone out of business. It's a place called Bobby Blues now. But Staccato had a restaurant license, but they didn't have a kitchen. So there was no one out of Abra who went in the small basic requirement of seeing that you had a kitchen to serve food. So they didn't try to get a nightclub license. They didn't try to get a tavern license, because those costs would have been a little bit higher. They went with a restaurant license, which is the easiest thing for them to get. But then Abra never even came out to see that, that you had a kitchen and you had a way to prepare food. But we've gotten better in that side of it, and I think that until you have a problem within an establishment, you probably don't see a lot of Abra investigators showing up. But Maria Delaney, who's the former director, was a very sort of law and order woman, and really sort of pushed up the underage. Hired a series of 14, 15-year-olds to go in and try to get drinks at establishments. And it was always mind-blowing to watch one of those investigations where you see this 14-year-old kid up on the stand and a restaurateur saying, like, wow, they didn't come in looking like that. They looked like they were over 21. And the kids never would lie, too. One of those things where, like, if they'd ask for an ID, they'd show their sideways DC identification card. They, obviously showed that they weren't old enough to drive, let alone drink. And sometimes you would just have places that didn't care. They just wanted to see that if you had an ID that you were going to show it, and they would still serve them. So I think Abra's improved, but it's still a long way to go, because you still have a lot of places that just don't abide by the law at all remotely, and those places actually make legitimate restaurants and legitimate nightclubs look bad, because then you start to paint them all with the same brush. I think if you look at Adams Morgan, there's probably 3 or 4 places that are real problem establishments that make the entire block look bad. And so I think that even if you were to ask some of those business owners, they would want to have heavier enforcement on the bad players, because it makes it intolerable for everybody who has a legitimate business on 18th Street.
At the forum, I think it was Mark Morgan was talking about, as a bar owner, it's really actually difficult to sometimes see through the fake IDs. And I guess we talked to Jeff Smith a little bit later, and he was saying how a lot of the enforcement is really political, and it has a lot to do with who you support for this.
Yeah, there is. I can give a couple examples of that. There's Mark did talk about the ability of having a ultraviolet light to check the legitimacy of IDs, and then everybody's supposed to have a identification booklet at the establishment so you can go and see. But it doesn't. That doesn't. In college, I had a friend who looked a little bit like his older brother, and so he would always use his older brother's ID. But if you were to look at the simple things, like this guy was significantly shorter than his brother. His brother was 6'2", 6'3", and this guy was 5'8". So if anyone just happened to look to see the guy's license is 6'3" and 200 pounds, and this guy's 5'8" and maybe 150 pounds, but they sort of look the same facially. So that's a responsibility on the business to do. As far as pick and choose enforcement, yeah, there's 2 great ones that I could point to right now. There's a bar of Adams Morgan called El Rincon, and it's been there for a long period of time. The owner of the establishment is a bit of a throwback to an earlier era of Adams Morgan. But last year they've been closed down twice by the chief of police for 72 hours, and both for violent incidents. And normally it's a kiss of death if you get that once. If you get two of those in the same year, almost always you get pulled. And they have like a series of violations in law. The owner of the place was convicted in the 80s of fencing stolen property. He had another establishment where there was a double homicide in early 2000s. So, within the last 20 years, this guy has had serious issues with not just, let's see, hold on. He had serious issues not only with ABRA, but with Metropolitan Police Department. And for some reason, he keeps being able to escape and keep operating this business. And so twice this year, they were closed for really violent assaults. The lieutenant from the 3rd District sat at the ABRA hearing and said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when someone dies in this establishment. And they still didn't give them the suspension. So most people would look to it that Manny Soloso, the guy who owns it, is a very close political ally of Councilmember Graham, and that his son is a Metropolitan Police officer. And if it was any other place in Adams Morgan, it probably would be closed down. But for some reason, either through political connections or through protections with his son, he seems to be able to get away with it. I think if anybody followed the Hades Tree incident up in Mount Pleasant, which is a little bit of a sillier version, but essentially she wanted to have a series of seats outside, 23 or something like that, and there's a tree that was in the middle of the block that was right there, and so